Good evening, members, officers. Good evening to member of the public. Jill Waite, thank you for coming. I need to read the emergency evacuation announcement for this Executive Committee meeting, the 25th of April 2024. The emergency evacuation announcement. There are no planned fire drills, so if the alarm goes off, please leave the building in an orderly fashion through the nearest fire exit. Please use the fire exit through the main doors of the hall or the fire exit in the storeroom adjacent to the stage. The fire assembly point is the island in front of the main entrance to the building. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please switch off mobile phones or turn them to silent. Please note that the meeting will be live streamed. Members, please ensure that your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak very clearly into the microphone. We have a member of the public present, so members of the public and press, whilst you are, of course, entitled to film or take photographs during this meeting, can I please emphasise to you that this should be done without disruption to the meeting and can only be done from a designated area in the public seating. Can I please therefore ask you to raise your hand clearly in the air if you wish to take photographs or film this evening? Nobody is filming, so thank you very much. Let's move to item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Mrs Gooding. I think there are no other absences, everybody else is present. We now move to item 2, non-members attending. There are none. Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of March. There are 2 parts to the minutes. There is the part of the meeting, the substantive part, which was not in exempt, and the parts that were in exempt. Members, I'm going to ask you to look at the minutes for the non-exempt part of the meeting and ask you whether I can sign the minutes as being a true and fair reflection of the meeting.
Agreed.
Is that agreed by everyone? Okay. I'll now turn to the exempt appendix minutes 153, 154, 155 of the 19th of March. Is it your wish that I sign the minutes as a true and fair view reflection of the meeting? Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Agreed, thank you. Item 4, questions on notice from councillors. There are none. Item 6, matters referred to the executive and reports from other committees in 2 parts. 6.1 is the report of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, improving access to affordable credit and financial services for low-income households via credit unions. I understand that Steve Summers, Strategic Director, will present this report. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Chair. So the report before members provides the report that went to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 5th of March, where it was agreed with a slight amendment to the 4th recommendation, as you can see on 6.1.1d. And therefore the recommendations before members tonight are to approve those amended recommendations. And there's an additional recommendation on there as a result of that amendment for officers to provide an implementation plan detailing any financial implications on working with existing well-established local credit unions at a future Communities Wellbeing and Housing Committee. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions, members? Will you please indicate if you've got questions for Steve? There are no questions. In which case, I shall move from the chair. I shall move the recommendations from the chair, as the lead member is not present. There are 2 recommendations. Recommendation 1 is to approve the amended recommendations of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 5th of March, which you see in the report and the covering note. May I take them en bloc? In that case, R2, that officers provide an implementation plan detailing any financial implications on working with existing, well-established local credit unions at a future Communities, Wellbeing and Housing Committee. So I've moved from the chair. I will still ask for a seconder, please. Councillor Cripps, seconded. Right. I'd like a show of hands in favour of recommendations R2, R1 and R2, please. Those in favour. Okay, thank you. Have you got the count? Those against? Those abstaining? 1 abstention. 8-4, 1 abstention. Both recommendations are passed. Thank you. Second part of item 6 is the report of the Climate Emergency Committee, Parks for Nature. We have the lead member, Councillor Michael Hoy, present. So I will ask Councillor Hoy to present the report and the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendations are shown on 6.22 of the report, or the sole recommendation. This is a report which details the Parks for Nature. In other words, we are letting some of the parks grow. In some of the parks, we are planting trees. The intention is to increase biodiversity and also to provide a carbon sink, essentially. Some have trees, some don't. Obviously, the one I'm most aware of is Holbridge, which is 600 trees to be planted. Others have fewer and some have none, but the intention is to increase biodiversity, carbon sink. There have been some concerns from residents about this when we did this last year, which I'm sure Mr. Hotton's aware of as well. But despite those concerns, which I think have been generally addressed, I think this should go forward. So I'm putting forward the recommendation on the page that said R1 to continue the rollout of the Parks for Nature scheme to complete the listed sites: Bedford Close Rayleigh, Brockford Green Rayleigh, Canewdon Village Green, Holbridge Recreation Ground, Malvern Road Rayleigh, Millview Meadows Rochford, Rawworth Recreation Ground, Rochford Reservoir, Rayleigh Leisure Centre and Swain Park.
Before I take the recommendation to the vote, we have Mr. Hotton here, and I'd like to ask him if he wishes to add anything to the remarks of the lead member.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you. Yes, so this is the second tranche of the Parks and Nature scheme, and so what I'd just like to emphasise is that in a similar fashion to the first tranche, there will be an opportunity to look at those sites and tweak them as we go along. So this is about relaxed mowing. It's a great wakering from the first tranche springs to mind, where I think ward members expressed concerns with the design, if you like, of the long grass areas that were left, and so that was tweaked and recut and redesigned over that period of time, over the year, to find a happy medium. I think again it's very similar here, that it will roll out this tranche of Parks and Nature relaxed mowing, but should I think ward members express concern with perhaps there being too much grass or too little, then it's something we're quite flexible about adjusting through the year. It's just about making sure we actually get going on this. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hotton. Again, before we take the recommendation to a seconder and to vote, are there any questions? I think Councillor Stanley has just indicated.
Thank you, Chair. I've been over to Swain Park to see what the planting is of these trees. And whilst I agree with the tree planting, and they're only a foot high, the trees that have been put in, how are we going to visualise the cutting of the grass around these trees? Once these trees are in position, the vehicle that we usually have to cut the grass at height when it is available to cut, won't be available to cut with that machine. So how are we going to, where the trees have been put is somewhat right dead centre of a grass cutting machine. And I just asked myself and asked those that might understand why we're putting in these trees in the areas that we're putting them in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Obviously, you're putting the question as relates to Swain Park, but you're saying it relates to the continuing rollout to these other areas as well as the existing ones?
Yes, with the Rawliffe Recreation Ground, I do understand that some of them, or the planting of the trees will be further back on the recreation ground, as we are in negotiations for football pitches, which are needed more than what the trees are. So I don't know if that sort of correlates with what we're talking about.
Thank you for the clarification, Councillor Stanley. Can I ask Mr. Houghton to comment on the operational issues that have been raised? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So as far as we're aware, Councillor Stanley, the planting has been done in such a way that will allow mechanical management of the site still. So, you still have to cut the grass and access. I'm not familiar with the part you're describing, so possibly the best thing to do is for us to meet on site if you've got any concerns. But certainly the planting has been designed, as far as I'm aware, in such a way that allows mechanical access to the field still for the grass to be cut. Okay.
Yes, I would rather meet with the officer at Swain Park, the area that I'm looking at. And also, I've had complaints, let's put it like that, that the grass is now to an extent too high, even for dog walkers or to let their dogs off leads. But that's nothing to do with this planting of the trees at this moment in time, but I will discuss that with him.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Thank you, Mr. Houghton. I guess you two will meet shortly to resolve the issue. It might be helpful to hear informally by email, Mr. Houghton, as to what the outcome of the meeting is. Thank you. Councillor Mr. Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Through you, Chair, to Mr. Houghton, please. Page 6.24 and the Rayleigh Leisure open space, it says status on hold due to potential alternate use of site. So just to seek some reassurance on that, will the grass cutting be carried out in the normal way, Mr. Houghton, in the interim period? But also, I just want to come back on the, you mentioned earlier that all of these schemes are fairly flexible, I think, maybe. And that's somewhat, in some sense, I quite like it, but in others, I think that unless this came back to committee and was considered, I think then when we're looking at the carbon, are we going to look at that effect at committee on making those changes prior to just being on ward members kind of responding to perhaps residents' concerns? But I think in my view, I think it should be more considered because of the effect in the overall scheme of what we're trying to achieve with the Parks for Nature. Thank you.
So if I understood that correctly, you're asking for future reports to go to the Climate Committee or the equivalent to the Climate Committee to confirm the levels of carbon sequestration. Is that correct? Mr. Houghton?
Yes, thanks for that summary.
It's okay.
Thank you. Yes, more than happy to continue to report back into the committee on progress. To your first question, half the site had been cut due to a lack of communication. I can assure you the other half of the site is being cut this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Houghton.
Okay, members, further questions? Doesn't look like there are any. Councillor Hoy, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to move the recommendation as there's been a bit of a passage of time since you spoke.
No problem at all. Chairman.
Thank you.
The recommendation is set out on 6.2.2 to continue the rollout of Parks for Nature scheme to complete the listed sites: Bedford Close Rayleigh, Brockford Green Rayleigh, Canewdon Village Green, Hullbridge Recreation Ground, Malvern Road Rayleigh, Millview Meadows Rochford, Broworth Recreation Ground, Rochford Reservoir, Rayleigh Leisure Centre and Swain Park.
Just give me a moment.
Yeah.
Members, I'm just checking the briefing notes to the report. Okay. I have queried the matter of the list, and I will read the list that's actually in the report that has been put forward. It's on page 6.2.1 of it's the report of the Climate Emergency Committee, and I'll list them as Bedford Close Rayleigh, Broxford Green Rayleigh, Canewdon Village Green, Holbridge Recreation Ground, Malvern Road Rayleigh, Millview Meadows Rochford, and Clements Hall Recreation Ground Hawkwell. That's where the list of the additional sites is made in the report to the executive. Mr. Houghton, can you please confirm that is correct?
Yes, I can. That's correct. Thank you.
Apologies, Chairman, I was working earlier from a computer and now I'm working from paper, which meant I was on the wrong page slightly for those.
In good order, I should repeat it or ask you to repeat it. Which would you prefer?
I'm happy to read it again correctly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We resolve to continue to roll out the Parks for Nature scheme to complete the listed sites: Bedford Close Rayleigh, Broxford Green Rayleigh, Canewdon Village Green, Hullbridge Recreation Ground, Malvern Road Rayleigh, Millview Meadows Rochford, and Clements Hall Recreation Ground Hawkwell.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Is there a seconder, please, for the motion, for the recommendation? Councillor Stanley. Okay. I will now ask for a show of hands. All those in favour of the recommendation are one. There is only one. That's a unanimous verdict. Thank you, members. We now move to item 7. And item 7 is the One Team Transformation Programme, strategic partnership with Brentwood Borough Council, Q4 an annual update, which has previously been to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and there was no recommendations put forward. I'm going to ask Greg Campbell, the Director of Policy and Delivery, to present the report, noting, of course, that in terms of the continuation of the programme will now be in the form of a transformation programme, and members of the executive have previously had a presentation from Mr. Campbell in briefing. Thank you. Greg.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. As said, this is the One Team Transformation Programme strategic partnership between Rochford and Brentwood. It was the Q4 and annual update. Just a couple of things to inform members of this evening of a couple of questions that was asked at the Scrutiny Committee, one of which was asked about the breakup or the break between Brentwood and Rochford of the top tier staff 1 to 4. So basically they want to know where the contracts of those officers lay. I've been given that information. 11 of those contracts are with Rochford and there's 23 that are with Brentwood. Other questions on the evening were around the original estimate of the budget saving. Although it's quite clear, obviously, there's other things that are beneficial from the partnership. But they want to know what the actual savings identified at the start were, and it was between 600 and 850,000 from 2024-2025. And the other point that was raised has already been covered by the Chair about moving to transformation programmes or plans. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Greg. You will also note, members, that the principal sponsor of the One Team Transformation Programme is in fact the Chief Executive of the Council, Jonathan Stevenson, and he is also here, and I'm sure if you have questions that he will be also pleased to take them. I'm assuming that. Thank you. So, members, have you any questions for Mr. Campbell or Mr. Stevenson? Councillor Cripps.
Thank you, Chair. Jonathan, I know we're looking back here to Q4 23. Could you speculate when we're going to start seeing project management being considered under the one team approach? Some time ago, we talked about your project management system being rolled out and used by Rochford. I'm just looking for an indicator when we might start seeing that come in quarterly reports.
If I was okay, Councillor Cripps and Chair, the project team have started to put that in place. There are reports that come regularly to exec which identify the projects that are coming forward. They're working with staff. They've rolled out the project management system governance with officers. The one thing that they've still got to finish off is I call it a video, but it's more of a PowerPoint presentation that can help everyone, members and officers, so they can just click on it and view it. That is the one thing that I believe is outstanding. Otherwise, the project management governance and reporting is in place, I believe.
Thank you, Greg.
Any further questions, members? Councillor Hoy, sorry, missed you.
No, I'll put my hand up as you looked away, I'm afraid. This is a question, because obviously the one team isn't just about saving money. In my view, it's about other things as well. And one of those things was resilience. The intention was to not just to save money, to bring resilience as well as better working practices. Do you as the Chief Executive feel that resilience is there at the moment, or is there still to work to do to get the resilience we need?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hoy. Resilience, yes, that was one aim of the partnership. With regard to resilience, one of the hardest things for us to measure is what it would look like if we didn't have the partnership as well. So it's hard to look back because we'd have had to look at other savings. We might have had to look at different recruitment processes, because with the partnership, it's allowed us to recruit better talented or more talented people into the organisation, because we better reward them with different packages of remuneration. So that's meant we've got a different calibre of candidates coming to both councils, because it's two small councils. We're both it was quite challenging with the remuneration package we have. With regard to resilience generally, things like risk, emergency planning, business continuity, areas like that, we've now brought two very small teams together to create a bigger team. It still doesn't mean we're fully resilient from that, because obviously there's still small teams, but it has meant we've got learning from both organisations, best practice from both organisations coming forward to be create one, policy procedures that are singular across both councils as well. We've got a larger management team across the both councils than we'd have had individually, but that provides resilience, because if there was a problem or an issue in both councils, that means we can pull resources from one to the other, where before you'd have to do that through civil contingency type arrangements and mutual aid. We've got, in a way, a more aligned formal mutual aid, because the partnership allows for that. So if Brentwood needs some more resource for an issue, Rochford can support them and vice versa. That will do, and that's accounted for within our finance if that is the case as well. But some of the time it's just to support things like this year we've gone for a number of bids. Safer Streets funding. We've secured that funding. I feel it would have been difficult for both organisations to get that on our own, but by doing it together, we've got a large amount of funding through that. The same with the Ukraine funding. We've got over £1 million of funding from the county that we bid together for, and that £1 million funding, I feel we wouldn't have got on our own, and possibly might not have had the capacity to even bid for it as well. So we've created capacity in both organisations to do those things. There is still more we can do. We've only just implemented the Tier 4 management team, so we've now got the top team within the organisation. We're actually in a good position as well that we've only got 2 interim members of staff within that top 40 management from tier 1 to 4 in the country. That's quite unique. Most teams have got 30 to 40% interim resource, so that's pretty resilient for us as well. We're obviously not being complacent. We've still got 2 roles to fill. We'll hopefully do that moving forward. So there's a number of areas I think are better, more resilient, but there's a lot of still more we could do together to get even more resilient. Hope that's helpful.
Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Hoy?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. I've seen Councillor Stanley indicate, and then I'll take Councillor Mrs Newport. No, I'll take you first.
Thank you, Chair. I do notice that the Tier 4 manager has been appointed, and when exactly will that manager be taking up the position for the amount of work that obviously he's going to be taking on board, or has that already been started? Thank you.
Councillor Stanley, can you specify which Tier 4 manager? There's a number of them.
Sorry. I've just got Tier 4 manager to be appointed and waiting for them to take up position on most of this assets, facilities, health, homeless, housing, and so on. So I just wondered when this Tier 4 manager or managers when are they taking up this position, or have they already taken it up?
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Greg, have you managed to locate the reference?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Evening, Councillor Stanley. Yeah, that's referring to the Q4 report. Most of those tier, if not, I'm just checking with the information that I've got, but most of those Tier 4s have been appointed to now in the last couple of months. There are 1 or 2. So one of mine is coming in June. So hopefully by about, well, June or July, most of those positions, I believe, will be all filled. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, without the information right in front of me, any of those, looking down the list, that may not have been filled. But I can't see, and I think most of them have and are being filled as we speak. So there's 1 or 2 remaining that still need to come through. So assets, I think, have actually taken up their position in the last month. There's a gentleman called Andy and someone else. So I think they are there.
Can I come back, Chairman, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Please.
With the like, if you like, health and safety of the council, is the idea of I'm just referencing dementia friendly. Would that be part of that criteria that the manager is going to take up, as we're already taking it up with the Rayleigh Town Council as a town leadership sort of thing? So will RDC be involved in that as well, please? Thank you.
I'm a little confused because I don't see that referenced in the report anywhere. Greg, is it something that you're aware of and can help answer?
Chair, apologies, because I don't have the details of the jobs and the roles under each one. If I've said yes, it may be the wrong one. So I'd probably need to just take that offline, check where that may fit under, and then I can come back. Probably something I need to speak to my colleague, Officer Anderson, over there.
I think technically he probably comes under my remit as Tier 4 Communities, Leisure and Health. So I'll take that forward.
Thank you, Kim. Councillor Mrs Newport, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And my question, if I may, is to the Chief Executive, and it's regarding the staff morale. And the risk score doesn't seem to change, and staff morale seems to be quite, in my view, depicted quite low in your report. Are there plans, and what plans and practices are in place to improve staff morale, please?
Can you take that, Jonathan?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Lisa Newport. With regard to morale, this is obviously a looking back report, so we're looking back over the last 3 months. Prior to this report, we were going through quite a big change programme for at least 30 managers within the organisation. So that's quite a big core of the organisation. Having your manager going through change obviously creates a bit of instability with regard to the team. Since that, we have now recruited, as we picked up with Councillor Stanley, all those roles and created more stability in the partnership. And we've had a number of service reviews implemented as well. Since that, we've had member briefings, staff surveys, the decision about the council HQ. From those briefings and from those surveys, we're getting positive feedback. There's still concerns, and there's still some areas that we need to work on to support those concerns. But we're in a much better place than that period of time. But we're not complacent around that. We're regularly speaking to the staff, whether it's one-to-one, in a staff briefing, in a smaller group, management group. Recently, I did a full briefing with all the finance team around their concerns about not having a director yet because of Tim Willis as an interim director and how that affects them, and provided them some reassurance around that, and actually how we're going to join up their departments, because they're very keen now to work more closely together with Brentwood and Rochford moving forward. So yes, there was quite large pockets of uncertainty. I think the Tier 4 stability and the decision to move to a new HQ has been seen very favourable in the organisation. But I wouldn't say there isn't areas of morale might be low for different reasons, but not because of the one team or because of sort of more corporate-led projects.
Do you have a follow-up? Yes, of course.
Thank you. So further reports then, you're hoping that the unchanged risk score arrow will actually be a going down one where the risk is decreased in staff morale, so there'll be a better level of staff morale, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. So the intention is this was looking back, we'll look forward. What I've said, obviously, is what actions we've taken. Whether those actions have come to a amber green and moved it into a better place, will be a report of the next quarterly report for that as well. So those actions and the feedback, but we need to give you accurate data and information for next quarter.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Councillor Mr Newport, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to touch on the on page 7.6, the resident survey. Within that, the results of that survey, the support for the partnership seemed to be quite negative, I think, is the conclusion. But the awareness, I know we haven't got a massive engagement with that resident survey. So what are the plans moving forward on the frequencies? But also, I think it's fair to say that what the Chief Exec has mentioned earlier about the benefits and gaining that additional funding through being a partnership, I think as a council, we really need to push that to residents to show them what we've achieved with the partnership, make them more aware. So to turn some of these negatives into positives. But moving forward, how are we going to engage better and explain the partnership to residents and the benefits that we can achieve with the partnership? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Councillor Newport. So there's a couple of responses to that. As to individual councils, really our residents should recognise by our performance and the quality of service first and foremost. Even if they didn't know the partnership in some way should be secondary, so they should see that first in our service delivery. Yes, I think also there's opportunities to talk about what we've done together and why, by doing it together, has provided a better economy of scale, a better efficiency, more effective by doing that. The numbers in this survey in some ways are disappointing because if you look at the overall population, but also isn't is pretty normal of a survey like this. If you look at the survey overall, total, no 33 of people aware, no of support 53, 33 of those weren't aware. So probably if you weren't aware, you're probably not supportive, might be not supportive as well. So I think when we do our annual surveys with regard to budget and other things, I think that's where we should be picking up valuable data off residents and really push that to find out based on how Rochford is performing and how Brentwood. But I think it'd be good to provide some narrative around what we've done in the year and what's benefit of having an arrangement with Brentwood, or for vice versa with Rochford, because I think residents should know we're being very innovative in what we're trying to do. But as you can see, not many people are aware. What I'd like to see them aware of through the improved service or higher quality, first and foremost, and then to hear that that's also been through an innovative approach, because the one team partnership on its own isn't what makes the success of the council. It's our performance that does that. What we've done over the last 2 years in an organisation, a commercial organisation, would be seen as combining two organisations together is quite a difficult time. So I think now the benefit of doing that and putting the core into this partnership means that we can actually now hopefully really go on and move forward, establishing the top management team across the whole top 4 tiers of the organisation. In some organisations that create partnerships like this, they still haven't done that over 5 years. So what we've done over 2 years is pretty successful, and that helps on the resilience piece that Councillor Hoy put up as well. But I think providing a strong narrative around innovation and how we are more resilient, but I think really we should produce proof to our residents that it's helping our performance, or at least stabilising our performance against where if we didn't do anything, we could have had a reduced performance. So, and that's, as I said right from the outset, it's quite hard sometimes to measure, because you can't say what would have happened if we didn't do it, but we're going to try and reflect that as much as possible in the narrative and the performance moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Councillor Hoy, thank you.
So just a very final question. I've met a number of councils, particularly at the DCN conferences I've been to, who have followed a similar path to this. Everyone I've spoken to have been adjoining councils, and we are very different in that we have councils between us. We don't have borders that touch. Do you think that's been a constraint in what we've been doing? Do you think it's been helpful or unhelpful?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Hoy. From my previous experience, I was a director at 2 councils that shared a border. The biggest concern throughout the whole partnership, and most of the partnerships you reference, is the concern about the takeover of one over the other. We haven't had that, and I think actually it's made it faster in our delivery. Actually, obviously, sitting in the middle of it for you as councillors, you might not see this, the pace over someone else's because you've not been involved in another council. But how far we move forward, not the concern that Rochford's going to take over Brentwood or Brentwood's going to take over Rochford, because that can't happen, has meant we can move at a faster pace and actually do some things that have had less concerns to you as members, and what I've seen at Brentwood as well, less concerns to members of Brentwood, because it's going to be a partnership of efficiency and being more effective, not of something that's ever going to be a merger. So I think there's a real benefit of that. So our uniqueness, I think, definitely helps that. I don't know, members might tell me differently. Are you concerned that Brentwood's going to merge with us? Because they can't. Are Brentwood concerned that Rochford, that they can't? So I think it's made us move on and focus on the prize rather than the politics. So that could have been the case.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any further questions, members? There are none. You may have seen that it's a report for noting. So members, will you all agree to note the report at item 7?
Noted.
Agreed? Thank you. Members, we now move on to the voluntary sector grants. Councillor Mrs Gooding is the lead member, but she's not available for this meeting. So I'm asking Kim Anderson if she will present the report to us. I would also say to you in briefing, she mentioned that there's a provision within the report which now can change, and Kim will be referring to that, and I expect to bring another recommendation to you. Kim, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank the evaluation panel that went through the voluntary sector grant applications with myself. So we had 34 applications requesting a total of £32,596.99 out of a pot that was available of £10,000. So it was very oversubscribed. I think one of the things from the evaluation panel was around getting more funding out to a more, larger number of groups. So we was agreed that we would just allocate £500 to the top numbers of groups until the £10,000 went, basically. So the recommendations in the report are to recommend the funding that the cross party member evaluation panel felt should be awarded. And that's set out in Appendix A. So there's a list of those that applied for funding, those that we are recommending to be awarded funding, and those that will not be successful will be signposted to other funding that could be available for their projects. Subject to agreement by the executive group tonight that those organisations are allocated the funding and that will be paid out as soon as possible. Recommendation 3 is to note the feedback from some of the organisations in regard to the funding that they received in the previous year, 2023, 2024, and that's set out in Appendix B. Recommendation 4 is to note the annual update from Rayleigh Rochford and District Association of Voluntary Services, RAVS, and that's set out in Appendix C. Recommendation 5 is that, and that was brought up at the exec briefing, around actually a further report coming back to committee, looking at longer term funding for the likes of the voluntary sector. So that is RAVS and also Citizens Advice Bureau. So that would be like more core funding over a longer term period. So that would be a further report coming back to committee. And then in addition to that, we are looking at an additional recommendation. And the reason for the additional recommendation is that we are still awaiting the outcome of the Essex County Council voluntary sector funding infrastructure model, because the procurement process was just stopped and nobody was awarded any the contract, as it were. So the recommendation is that we look at, I'll give you the exact wording, just bear with me, to approve 15,000 discretionary funding for Rayleigh, Rochford and District Association of Voluntary Services for 24-25, and that is within existing budgets. And the rationale for that is that we think from Essex at the moment that the resilient, their model coming out is not going to be to the end of 2024, basically. So they've said autumn 24. So I think in the meantime that's a sensible level of support. They're looking for some interim funding to go into RAVS, which is approximately £10,000. So for me, it's the element of providing that support for this year, and then going forward, we'll look at the core funding over a longer period of time. Happy to take any questions.
If I may, I'd like to kick off with a question. How much have we received as an interim funding from Essex?
So the funding is directly to Rochford District Council. It's not going directly to RAVS, and I think that was probably because of the previous procurement process and the governance around that. So it's 3 months worth of funding. So we think it's approximately about £10,000, because they would normally get £38,000 from Essex. But the exact figure I haven't got from county at the moment. We're just going to sign up to a grant agreement with them.
But to continue with the question, but we feel that we're able to award £15,000 as an interim within our own budgets, as well as considering the interim payment from Essex.
So what I would say, Chair, is that County Council used to award funding to RAVS of about £38,000 per year. Rochford District Council traditionally used to top slice the 25k discretionary pot of funding. £15,000 would be awarded to RAVS. So all we're saying is we're going to continue with that top slicing with that £25,000 pot, but Essex are only contributing at the moment 10,000, so a quarter of what they would normally do.
Thank you for clarifying that. And if I may, I'd like to ask a further question about the allocation and the allocation of £500. Because when I looked down the list, I saw that all of them were in excess of £500. And there's a concern that started to turn in my head that said, is it possible that the £500 won't be enough for those organisations to actually take forward the proposal they put forward for funding in the first place? In other words, they asked for 1,000. If they only get 500, is there a possibility that they won't be able to take those initiatives forward.
So in the letters that would go out to those organisations that were deemed to be successful, there is that caveat in there to say, this is the amount of funding we're awarding to you. If your project cannot be progressed, then we would reallocate that money back down the line, as it were, to another funding. I've done it elsewhere, and generally they don't say no to any funding that's coming their way.
I'm sure you're right, Kim, but nevertheless, it was an appropriate question I felt to ask and put on the record. Having hogged the questioning for the moment, at discretion of the chair occasionally, I'd like to open up further questions from members. Councillor, Mr. Newport.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a couple of questions, Kim, because I'm quite confused by this. Because so my understanding is that they've got £10,000 now, and then you're recommending that we put an additional 5 in now, 15. No, I'm totally lost with this, because it does sound quite confusing. You're saying because Essex basically they've made a mess of their system, that we're going to stump up in the interim. But
So what I would clarify is that traditionally Rochford District Council used to fund RAVs £15,000.
Yeah.
So we're not changing that. We're just saying, are we going to allocate that for this year,
right,
24-25? What Essex are saying, they're not going to give out their normal annual grant of 38,000. They're giving an interim payment of £10,000 approximately to RAVs, but it's not coming to RAVs directly. It's coming to Rochford District Council for us to allocate out to them. I think it's just the governance around the previous procurement exercise that they're just trying to navigate around.
right, okay.
So in total, they will be getting less money than they would do from last year, as it were.
Okay. All right, I understand now. Just moving on then to Appendix A, which Councillor Mr. Mason just referenced, I think was about this £500. How are these, when we allocate this money, do we do any sort of auditing on this at all to look at the outcomes?
So what we would generally do is once we've awarded the funding, there will be some terms and conditions of that funding. So part of that is an evaluation of the project. Did it meet the outcomes that you've set out in your application? How many people did you, support for your service, whatever it is. So we do that as part of an evaluation of the project as well.
So it's almost a self-evaluation, is it?
Well, they would provide information. I think there is some that members will be aware of groups there that they would visit, and we would probably visit as well as officers to see that they are spending it on what they've said they're spending it.
Right. Okay, thanks, Kim. Thank you.
I've got 3 questioners or speakers. Take Councillor Stanley first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was a little bit worried exactly where the funding goes. So could you elaborate a little bit more for me? Because I don't seem to have, I think Councillor Newport was heading in the right direction, but I was a bit concerned that with so much money going to RAVs in the form of 25,000, isn't it, in total? Or
Which is a mixture from Rochford District Council and Essex County Council.
Yeah, exactly, 25,000. I just, with the approach of what Essex County Council has done and not given out the grant of 38,000 and reduced it down to 10,000, is that not telling us to reduce our budget as well, or are we sticking to that 15,000 that we are giving out to RAVs? I'm a little bit worried that if they're going to reduce it, there won't be enough money in the kitty, if you like, to RAVs, that sort of thing. So
I think, Kim, if you could repeat exactly what you said to Councillor Newport, because I think that was where I was at. So if you could listen to this one carefully. Thank you.
So the payment from Essex, so they would traditionally give RAVs 38,000, which is for the whole year. What they're proposing at the moment is 3 months worth of funding, which is the £10,000. And that will take us up, hopefully, to when we've got what the new model looks like from Essex. So, but what I'd also say is that there is a further report coming back to committee, which will look at the longer term funding for the likes of RAVs and also what the impact is of whatever that model looks like going forward.
Thank you, Kim. That's getting slicker and slicker. So well done. Councillor Hoy, please.
Sorry, same subject again. So, Essex County Council funding RAVs £10,000 out of a normal £38,000, so broadly for 3 months, just over. But we're funding them for an entire year in one go. I think it would be wiser for us to say we will fund up to £15,000 and we'll pay it to them quarterly to match Essex County Council's contributions per quarter. It would make much more sense. Otherwise, we're giving all their money in one go and they might not be in existence in a 6 months' time.
That's going to prove an interesting statement on the record. I wish you well. Kim, would you like to
I would
try and
say
answer that?
we've tabled what we're proposing from an officer perspective to members, so it's a member decision ultimately what you want to do.
Councillor Hoy, it was an interesting perspective you drew there in public. Would you like to turn that into, if I give you the intended additional resolution, would you like to turn that into something else? It was to say, as an R6, which has been given to me, to approve £15,000 discretionary funding for Rayleigh, Rochford and District Association for Voluntary Service for 2024 to 25, which is within existing budgets. Do you wish to amend that?
Not necessarily. I was raising it as a question. I didn't know what other members felt about that. That was all. I wasn't raising a proposal at this point. I thought it was worthy of a discussion to see if we should allocate on an ongoing basis rather than all in a lump at the beginning of the year.
I shall leave that for members to pick up as the case may be. And if members are thoughtful of your suggestion, I'll leave it to them to make any amendments they would wish to make. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I may be able to come up with some clarification here. First of all, I need to declare an interest as a trustee of RAVs. I won't be voting. I will abstain from the vote, and as I was involved with the choices where the funding went. RAVs are at the moment in a very precarious position. They do have funding for another year. That's guaranteed. We have plenty of funding, depending upon what Essex do. But the money that this council is going to give is really important that they get it still to keep going for that year. So it's at least a year there without any problems at all. So, and hopefully Essex will get that sorted by the end of this year.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Obviously, that minute will have to be caveated on the fact that you are a trustee of RAVs and therefore had that information in that role. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Reeves.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the interesting things that this whole exercise has thrown up, when you consider that in previous years, we've actually struggled to have enough people to take the grants. And when you consider the increase in the amount of people who've actually applied for the grant this year, it's a bit of a sign of how things are going. I think the uncertainty that we're giving RAVs if we don't do what we're suggesting to do tonight, despite what Councillor Williams has said, I think the uncertainty that we may be actually seeding into them, where they're obviously going to have much more demand on their services, is something that we need to avoid. So I'm fully supportive of recommendation 6 as read. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Reeves. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say that actually I have very limited experience of RABs, mainly since I've become a councillor. Have I been aware of what they do within the community? I'm always amazed at what they do achieve with the very little funding they do have. It's run by mainly volunteers, and if any funding is to be given, I would like them to be given the whole amount in one go, if it's possible, for Rochford District Council rather than in bits and pieces, because I think they need to be able to plan ahead, to have certainty in what they're doing, and continue to give a really, really good service to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Wilson. Any other members wish to ask questions or make amendments to the proposed, in particular, the new R6? Okay, there's none. In which case, members, I'm going to move R1 to R6 from the chair in the absence of the lead member. I will ask, when I've read them out, I don't have to, but I will ask for a seconder. R1, to recommend the funding that the member cross-party evaluation panel felt should be awarded as set out in Appendix A. R2, subject to agreement of the executive that the organisations are allocated the funding to be paid out as soon as possible. R3, to note the feedback from some organisations in regard to the funding they received to 23-24 voluntary sector grants set out in Appendix B. R4, to note the annual update from the Rayleigh, Rochford and District Association RAVs annual report in Appendix C. R5, that a report comes to the relevant committee once the outcome of the Essex County Council Voluntary and Community Sector BCS infrastructure model is determined, to understand the impact this will have on the Rayleigh, Rochford and District Association for Voluntary Services RAVs. The new R6, to approve £15,000 discretionary funding for Rayleigh, Rochford and District Association for Voluntary Service for 2024-25, which is within existing budgets. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Reeves by a very short finger. Thank you. I'd like to ask now for a show of hands for those in favour of the recommendations from R1 to R6 inclusive, please. Is that unanimous? It is unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Right, we now move to item 9. I got so used to items 16 and 17 from the previous meeting, I'm just surprised to find we're only at 9. And it is the last item. The last item is the purchase of waste and street cleansing vehicles. To consider the report of the Executive Lead Member for Environmental Services, Councillor Stanley, setting out in the vehicles that require purchasing to ensure continuity of delivery for the waste and street cleansing service undertaken by Rochford North. Councillor Stanley, are you in a position to present the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report, R1 and R2, will give the council their own mechanical sweepers and not hire them or in the way that has been done in the past. It's also to delay the purchase of a vehicle's fleet where we have spent a considerable amount of money and I believe that we can use that money and also the fleet as it stands at the moment to recover some of the costs that we've spent.
Councillor
So-
Stanley, I'm going to stop you there.
Oh,
I'm taking the report as I've read it,
yeah,
and it is a report that says delay or defer that decision. So
yeah.
I think
I'm
it's
just gonna
inappropriate for you to
Sorry.
enter into speculation around it. So
Okay,
please
okay.
stop there.
Thank you. Okay, so this is R1 to delay the purchase of the remaining vehicle fleet with the exception of the purchase of 2 mechanical sweepers at an approximate cost of 253,000, whilst a further business case is presented for consideration. R2 to instruct Rochford North to arrange for the purchase of these vehicles.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Before we take the recommendations to a seconder and indeed a vote, we have Mr. Houghton here, and I wonder if he has any further comments he'd like to add to the presentation made by Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Only just to reiterate that the purchase of these 2 vehicles will be much appreciated by Norse. It help us in delivering the service. As I think, as Councillor Stanley alluded to, one of the vehicles is on hire, and so we're not without sweepers, if you like. So there is a need for mechanical sweepers to deliver the service. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Members, have you questions for the lead member or Mr. Houghton? Councillor Cripps.
Thank you, Chair. Page 9.3, para 211, talks about 4th of July for the commitment. Does that mean we're going to use May, June for the procurement process to get us to an order date of the 4th of July, or are we going to start the procurement process on the 4th of July? Thank you.
So sorry, my apologies for not making the report clearer. So that's alluding to that the remaining fleet, so not the 2 mechanical sweeps, but the 2 mechanical sweeps we'll probably start to purchase tomorrow, should it be approved. And then we will move forward, and I'll bring back another report in July to consider the business case that Councillor Stanley wishes me to put together for the remaining fleets.
Okay, so the procurement starts thereafter. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, Councillor Cripps, the business case has to be approved before procurement can proceed. Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Wilson.
Hello, Chair. Thank you. I've got a question for Marcus, if that's okay, through yourself, Chair. Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Marcus, in the report, it talks about programme of maintenance and condition of vehicles. There's nothing in the report about the programme of maintenance for the vehicles. Not that I read, I hope I didn't miss it. What my concern is here is the contingency is basically if there is a major breakdown, then we will have to hire for replacements. Is that correct?
Yeah, please answer. Thank you, Mr. Houghton.
So that is correct, yes. And so in that sense, it's imperative that the report comes forward in July for consideration. But that's as soon as I can bring forward the rest of the fleet for consideration.
Okay.
Okay, it's fine. The second part.
I'd like to seek clarification on your question, if I may. We are talking here about delaying the business case for the second part of the general fleet of waste freighters, whereas this procurement that we may approve this evening is about street cleaning vehicles. So can you restrict yourself to the 2 vehicles that are proposed to be purchased at this point where we do have a business case?
Apologies, Chair. That's the end of my questions. I'll pick up with Marcus separately outside the meeting.
I hope members appreciate what I was trying to do there. We have separated the second part of the fleet of general freighters from the street cleaning vehicles, and therefore it is not appropriate to discuss tonight or speculate upon the business case for the larger purchase. Thank you, members. Any further questions? Councillor Stanley, would you care to repeat R1 and R2, and I'll ask for a seconder.
Thank you, Chair. R1, to delay the purchase of the remaining vehicle fleet with the exception of the purchase of 2 mechanical sweepers at an approximate cost of £253,000, whilst a further business case is presented for consideration. R2, to instruct Rochford North to arrange for the purchase of the vehicles.
Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Hoy, very appropriate given that you're holding the purse strings. Members, you've heard the 2 recommendations taken together, entirely logical. Can I have a show of hands in favour of R1 and R2, please? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Apart from Jonathan's signature on the last page, I think that's the last item on this agenda. But please don't go. I would just like to remind those who are listening to the streaming and those present that this is the last executive meeting that will be held for at least 5 years, as that is the current basis of the statute relating to the change of governance. I would like to make a series of personal thank yous. I'd like to thank all of the officers for the assistance they've given me over this unusual year in transition. And I would like to thank both deputy leaders, Councillor Hoy and Councillor Newport, for their support during these meetings. I would also like to thank all of you on the executive, for sticking to difficult tasks over the whole period of the year, picking up things that are completely new, work with, in some cases, new directors, change directors. You've all worked very hard on behalf of the residents and the council. So a big thank you to you, and a big thank you from me on their behalf. So thank you. See you on the other side in the committee system. Good night.
John, just on behalf of the exec members as well, we'd just like to say thank you for steering us all through this year with such enthusiasm and passion. And I don't think it's ever going to be the same. But thank you, John.
Thank you, Councillor Newport. Do you think you've had the last word?
I certainly have.